first story is one of the longer ones at the beginning of the book, and it is followed by some very short, tight little anecdotes more than stories. But well, they're stories, but they're very quick. They're very funny, and they expose they expose a clear goal of the Decameron as a whole, but also they expose very explicitly the notion of religious hypocrisy, which was a big target for Boccaccio. He's getting a lot of this from the same source of outrage that fueled Dante. Dante looked around and saw Dante was at war pretty much with the Pope for his entire adult life, but he saw hypocrisy. He saw church officials who were sinning, who were stealing money, who were having children, who were doing all of these things that they said everybody else should not do. And whereas Dante's reaction is outrage, and he thunders against them, and he casts a conspicuous number of holy people into hell. Boccaccio takes a look at the same issue, and his response is really more to laugh, to see it as sort of funny. A little outrage underneath. There's that in every kind of sarcasm, but it's he makes it an object of fun. The first story concerns a Jew living in Rome, good friends with a Christian, and or not living in Rome, living in France, and good friends with a Christian, and the Christian is very concerned that his friend, the Jew, will be cast into hellfire after death. And he's very concerned for his soul. So he tries to convince him to become a Christian, to convert. And they talk about this, they sit down, they're good friends. They sit down, they talk, and the Jew says, okay, I will consider it. Let me go to Rome first. I want to go to Rome and observe the Pope. I want to go and see the Vatican and all of the center of Christianity as we know it, and I want to get a sense of what this is all about. And the Christian, quite tellingly, thinks, oh God, that's it. I'm sunk. He says, once my friend goes to Rome and sees what what sinning hypocrites the church officials really are, he's not going to want anything to do with it. And so, he kind of gives up right then. But the Jew has already packed his bags, and he goes, and he spends some time there, and he looks around, and he is quite disgusted by what he sees. And so he comes back, and the two of them meet. They sit down. Hi, how you doing? It's been a long time. Tell me about what's going on with you. And they catch up. They have a nice little meeting, and then the topic of Christianity comes up, and the Jew says, "I was outraged. I was sickened. The drunkenness, the sexual free-for-alls, the sinning, the lying, the hypocrisy. It was all just so blatant. It was just horrible. So I don't understand, how could these people be the center of the faith? How could they be the most important people in the faith?" And he was just going on and on and on. And of course, the Christian is sort of sitting there and slunking, like, yeah, I know. What are you going to do? But then the Jew comes back and says, Abraham comes back and says, but then I thought, if, despite all these people, if, despite the terrible leadership and the awful moral example of these people. If despite all that, it is still such a growing and vibrant faith, if it continues to grow in popularity and become more splendid and illustrious, I can only conclude that being a more holy and genuine religion than any of the others, it deservedly has the Holy Ghost as its foundation and its support. So whereas earlier I stood firm and unyielding against your entreaties and refused to turn Christian, I now tell you quite plainly that nothing in the world could prevent me from becoming a Christian. Which is funny. He says that, you know, if this religion can be so powerful, be so vibrant, despite this terrible leadership at the top, well, then that suggests that maybe it's got something going for it. Maybe that is valid. Maybe that is something that I should pay attention to. But it's significant how he makes that conclusion. He's willing to disregard all of the leaders because the faith has popular support. The faith continues to bring people together, and that the aggregate of all those faithful is more important than any leadership that they could possibly offer. It is its ability to unite people. That cinches the deal. And it says he becomes a Christian and lives the rest of his life extolling the gospel, yada, yada, yada. Which is very cute, which is very funny. The next story is also about a Jew and a Muslim. And they are, once again, friends. And the Muslim wants the Jew to do him a favor, to loan him some money. The Jew is a moneylender in this story. Think of that what you will. But the Jew doesn't want to loan him the money, and he instead tells him a story. It's a little story about the rings, about how his family has a tradition of one ring that is priceless and indicates the power and the authority of the family, and that is whoever inherits this ring from his father is then de facto the leader of the family, and gets, you know, the bulk of the estate and the wealth and the prestige and yada yada yada. And the ring gets passed on generation after generation. And on one generation, there are 3 sons who are all exemplary in their own way, and they all want the ring. Up until now, you know, everybody knows it's the one son who gets it, and then everybody else just accepts that, okay, I'm going to follow his lead. And so, in this story, the father goes out and has extra rings made, exact copies, so that he can then give on his deathbed a ring to each of the sons and tell them that this is the this is the sign and symbol of my belief in you. This is the sign and symbol of my love for you. This is the sign and symbol of the authority to lead that I invest in you. And they each take this, oh, and they're each touched, and they go off on their separate ways. But, you know, once the old guy dies, there's a bit of a conflict. Hey, I've got the ring. I'm in charge now. And the other 2 come and say, no, I've got the ring. I'm in charge now. And they spend forever fighting about that. And, well, it's not a complex little parable. It's not difficult to see that the three rings are metaphors for, well, spiritual truth. God hands down three near exact copies of the same item, and each son and their family interprets it a different way. So Christianity, Judaism, Islam. And this is it's an obvious little parallel, it's an obvious little story, and in the meta story of the Jewish moneylender and the Muslim merchant, the merchant sees what his friend is doing by telling this little story, and he appreciates it, and it all kind of works out in the end. They continue to be friends, they get along, and they do business together, and everybody gets rich and happy. But now, significantly again, you have this this quandary of dogma, of the religious tradition that is getting in the way of these people. It is something to be put aside, in essence. The Muslim merchant and the Jewish moneylender get along quite well, as long as they can just put aside all of that silly conflict. They just don't really care. And as long as they can ignore the rules, the strictures, the imposing authority of the tradition, as long as they can deal with one another as human beings, as friends, then everything works out. They're okay. It's just the dogma that gets in the way. And you can see that as a comparison immediately to what comes before, also about, two different religious traditions and the conflicts between them and how they need to sort of ignore all the hubbub. And they can find common ground. In the first one, of course, the Jew does convert, but that's kind of a sop to, Boccaccio was a Christian. He was living in Italy. There were a lot of Jews. Well, there weren't a lot. There were Jews in Italy. There were Muslims in Italy. It was a rich, vibrant society. We'll get to that. But he's still going to default to, it just becomes that another way. Different critics are going to have different interpretations of this, and that's fine. Let them go crazy. But for our purposes, I think you can see it is a sudden and very short staccato breaks here with these short, tiny, crystalline stories that, okay, he is really gunning hard for religious hypocrisy. And while you can argue that, well, maybe the Christians are coming out a little bit ahead of the pack, maybe his thumb is on the scale for that tradition, the very next story sort of pushes back against that, where you have a hermitage, a monastery, where there is a new young monk who is well, let's just say he stumbles across a young lady, and he is intrigued, and he manages to sneak her back into his little room in the monastery. And, these things happen. And the senior monk, the abbot, comes walking by, and he hears, stone walls, it's hard to hide anything, sound echoes. He hears something going on in that room. And so he puts two and two together and says, okay. And it's a problem. And he thinks, all right, this is against the rules. He's bad. I'm going to punish him, and that'll be it for that. The young man inside deduces this. He knows he's in trouble, so he arranges, or he manages to, well, he sneaks away for a little bit and goes to the abbot and says, I just remembered I got to go cut some wood, or that I cut some wood yesterday and I got to bring it back. I'm not sure which one it is. I just want you to know I'm going out. I'll be back in a little bit. Letting the abbot know that he is leaving for a indeterminate, but not necessarily short span of time. So the abbot goes to the man's room, the monk's room, and sees that the girl is still there. And he is intrigued. He is, dare I say, aroused. Master Abbot, having looked her up and down, saw that she was a nice, comely wench, and despite his years, he was promptly filled with fleshly cravings, no less intense than those his young monk had experienced, and he began to say to himself, well, why not enjoy myself a little? And he rationalizes that, well, yeah, I can just go in and I'm going to, do a little of the humpity, and who's going to know? What's the harm? He says very clearly, it is always a good idea, in my opinion, to accept any gift that the good Lord places in our path. Accept any gift that the good Lord places in our path. The joy of, the joy of sexual union, certainly, but the joy of human experience, the joy of human sexuality as a coming together of people, of enjoying one another as people, not just getting caught up in the sin of it, the rules, not bothering too much with, oh, okay, this is bad, but in this valuation, a union, sexual or otherwise, is inherently good because it makes you feel better, which is what we saw in the other two stories as well. It's always about this union of humanity opposed to the rules that seem to keep us apart, the traditions that seem to stifle that human hunger for communion, for empathy. And humanity is struggling to find that empathy, to find those little moments of joy that can make the rest of it go down a little bit nicer. And here we have to remember the context. This is during the plague. This is the spring of 1348. People are dying by, people are dying constantly. Finding little moments that provide some solace, that provide a little bit of entertainment, that pass the time pleasantly, that get your mind off the suffering and the death that's just outside the door. This is what he's arguing for. This is what he is portraying. Humanity opposed to the abstract, the chaos out the door. That maybe it is divine wisdom, but it's not making life any easier on a moment-to-moment basis. And he is fighting against that right at the beginning of this story, right at the beginning of this. These are the second, third, and fourth stories in this whole book of 100 stories. So he is making this point right up front that we need to put aside conventional morality. We need to put aside, for the time being, perhaps, but just all of the anxiety that sometimes just coming together is necessary. And we all need joy in our lives. It's inspiring.